My name's Jessica, and welcome to another episode of Let's Dish, where I talk to you about current events that are on my mind and true crime. Today, lucky for me, I've already done the dishes, so I'm coming to you without the dishes, but we're still going to talk about what I have to say because what I found is crazy, you guys. So as you know, this week we've been covering the Idaho 4 case because there's been new documents and new evidence and new stuff released, okay? So as we know in my prior videos, people were telling me I was insane because they found evidence on Kohberger, which would be the touch DNA that was found on the knife sheath, okay? So I started doing a little research into touch DNA, and I want to share what I found with you guys. So the Google search was, how definitive is touch DNA? So you guys can do this for yourself because we know that all they found was a piece of touch DNA that was on the button of a knife sheath, okay? So like the button on this, let's just say there's a little bit on a button, okay? And mind you, the knife sheath said United States Marine Corps on it, and Brian was not in the USMC also, so that's a little strange to me. Touch DNA is powerful, but not definitively conclusive. It's highly sensitive, picking up tiny skin cells, but suffers from contamination risks. Mixed profiles, multiple people's DNAs, or secondary transfer, DNA moving from person to person or object to object. In low quantity, making context and corroborating evidence crucial for proving guilt, often acting as more circumstantial evidence to exclude suspects or build a case, but not prove it alone. So let's start with there. As I stated previously, we know that before the Idaho crime was committed, that Brian had had a traffic stop in Pullman, Washington from the Pullman Police Department, which is where I said they could have easily obtained his DNA there. I find it highly strange that it says, making context and corroborating evidence crucial for proving guilt, often acting as more as a circumstantial evidence to exclude suspects. So typically touch DNA is not used to convict, it's used to exonerate. And it's used to build a case, but not prove it alone. Okay, so by just touch DNA, that does not prove anything because as you can see, it can be transferred from person to person or object to object. Therefore, with just touch DNA being found, I don't believe without the blood, without the hair, without any defensive wounds that touch DNA is enough evidence to put someone away for 4 unalivings, okay? Just wait, it only gets better. I'm so glad I thought of this Google search, you guys. Strengths and use cases. High sensitivity can yield profiles from just a few skin cells. Excellent for cold cases or objects with no blood or semen. There was no semen, and we know that there was no blood from Kohberger found at that crime scene, which I find also strange because if you were somebody 30 to 50 times per 4 people, that would mean, let's just say on the low end, 30, 60, 90, 120, at the high end, maybe 140 to 160. How likely is it that you're using a K-bar knife and you didn't cut yourself one time and you had no defensive wounds, as well as none of the victims had any of Kohberger's DNA under their fingernails or on them, okay? So that's what else is weird because, okay, there was a little DNA on the knife sheath. Anyone could have, grabbed a knife sheath, or you showed someone a knife and they pulled it out and they looked at it. That doesn't mean that they committed a crime. That's not enough proof for me. High sensitivity can yield profiles from just a few skin cells, excellent for cold cases or objects with no blood or semen. Revolutionary, transformed criminal justice, solving cases where traditional DNA was not found. Valuable context. DNA on a murder weapon sheath is highly incriminating, on a doorknob less so. Let's read that again. Valuable context. DNA on a murder weapon's sheath is highly incriminating, but on a public doorknob less so. Okay? Weaknesses and risks. Contamination. Easily mixed with DNA from investigators, quote, fingerprint brushes, unquote, or others who have touched the item. Secondary transfer. DNA can move from person to person, handshake, in parentheses, or object to object, implicating innocent people. Let's read that again. Secondary transfer of touch DNA can move from person to person, handshake, object to object, implicating innocent people. Low quantity or quality. Samples are often degraded, partial, or mixed, making interpretation difficult. Let's go over this biggest one right here in bold words. Not definitive. So touch DNA is not definitive, okay? Just because you have touch DNA does not mean that it's definitely them. Not definitive. Doesn't prove when or how the DNA was left, only that it is present. Not definitive. Doesn't prove when or how the DNA was left, only that it is present. Remember how they said that Bethany held exculpatory evidence that would possibly exonerate Kohberger? How it's used. Exculpatory, often used by defense to exclude suspects, as shown in cases like serial, in italics. Corroboration, works best alongside other evidence. Eyewitness and video, which, the only thing we know is that Dylan saw bushy eyebrows and a baklava mask, which how many other amounts of people could have had bushy eyebrows too? Corroboration works best alongside other evidence, eyewitnesses, and video to build a stronger picture. We never got the strong picture, and that's why all of us are still looking into this. All they said is, he said yes to the guilty plea and never said anything else. Think about that. Not sole evidence. Cases relying solely on touch DNA face significant skepticism due to reliability concerns. Not sole evidence. So the touch DNA means nothing. If you go back to the body cam footage, you'll clearly see that the police entering weren't wearing PPE. They didn't have gloves on. They weren't taking protective measures, which means what? Let's go back or scroll back to the beginning of the video. Contamination easily mixed with DNA from investigators, fingerprint brushes, or others who touch the item. Secondary transfer. DNA can move from person to person by handshake or object to object, implicating innocent people. So we don't have eyewitness footage of seeing Kohberger entering or leaving the house. We have no true cell phone data showing that he was actually on the same towers. We have zero blood, semen, or hair evidence left behind. There were no defense wounds on Brian Kohberger, and the victims also did not have DNA under their fingernails from Kohberger. However, there was a male's DNA found on one of the items that was unidentified. Kohberger had just been interviewed by the police when he was pulled over, which they could have got DNA, I don't know, when he handed over his license and registration. He was obviously familiar with the Pullman police, right? Since they had interviewed him and he wanted to be a cop, right? So tell me more about how they have all the evidence. When Google itself right here will tell you that touch DNA is not definitive, all you have to do is type in, let's see the exact search. How definitive is touch DNA? So you guys can go back, read that for yourself, then compare it with your notes from the crime and tell me, do you really believe somebody could have done something like that to 4 people in under 13 minutes, get no DNA left behind? He had nothing of theirs on him. They never found any of their DNA in his car, on his clothes, anywhere. Why is all we have the touch DNA? If he had committed a brutal crime, don't you think that I don't know, he would have bled in his car, there would have been blood somewhere, anywhere? After brutally unaliving people for 13 minutes? 4 adults or 6 adults couldn't fight off one grown man? Case closed. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
It says there is an increased risk of falsely linking an individual to a crime scene through its use of touch DNA.